Hello, everybody. Week 4, Chapter 4, taking a look at eukaryotic microorganisms, which I think often gets overlooked when we think about microbiology because we think it's all about bacteria. But as you already know, these are small things that have eukaryotic cells. And yes, in fact, they are considered microorganisms. This makes me super happy because I spent a good part of my time in graduate school looking, observing, and studying these types of organisms. So let's move ahead. First thing is that you're going to see this over and over again, and it's just important to know about the diversity of life. And you might remember in my last two videos, my spiel about why this was such an awesome topic in biology was thinking about the diversity of life. Okay, so here we go again. This week, we're dabbling into this domain eukarya. Now we have our multicellular eukaryotes. So those are things like animals and fungi. But a good portion of our fungi are called microfungi. So they're small and hard to see. We will mention a little bit about macrofungi. So you just have a kind of feel for some other things out there in nature. Of course, other multicellular things are plants. And that's about it. The other things here that you see, entamoeba, slime mold, ciliates, flagellates, trichomonads, microsporidia, and diplomonads are all things that we would consider to be essentially microorganisms. So here we go. I know that you have learned this cell over and over again, so I'm just going to leave it to you. If you need to review, pause the video and review, or take a look at your textbook and go back through those organelles. Okay, first thing I wanted to mention, we're going to talk about fungi first. The critical thing that's really different about fungi than the other microorganisms that we're talking about this week is that they still have a bit of a complex cell wall. And remember, cell walls function to contain the cellular contents and give really shape and support to the organism. So fungi, in fact, do have cell walls, and you see that when you see a mushroom, right? A mushroom standing up, out of the soil, and it's doing that because each of its cells is reinforced with essentially chitin, which is one of the complex carbohydrates that are present in that special cell wall of fungi. So you see the third bullet there, thick inner layer of the polysaccharide fibers composed of chitin or cellulose. So that's going to give it its nice support from the inside out. And it says it has a thin layer of mixed glycan. So this is not really like either our gram-positive or negative bacteria that we talked about last week. Now, the other couple of groups that we're looking at this week, the protozoa and the helminths, which are the worms, they in fact do not have cell walls, so we don't have to talk about those. All right, diversity of fungi. Like, I love fungi. My major professor in graduate school was trained in essentially identification of fungi. He also studied a variety of slime molds, one of those being a unique group of slime molds, and there's just a few of us in the world that have studied them. So maybe at this point, maybe under 30. So let's think about fungi. Fungi are on their own kingdom fungi. Here we have this mushroom on the top right side. This one's actually called a bolete. It has little tiny pores underneath that cap. But the other big group of fungi that we think about are the gilled fungi. So if you eat portobello mushrooms or any kind of your store-bought mushrooms, they have gills underneath there. And that's their spore-producing surfaces, actually. Some other things that you probably notice in the wild, shelf fungi grow right off of a tree. Even if the tree has fallen down, that shelf fungus will right itself so it's always parallel with the ground, and that's so that it can disperse its spores. Puffballs, small or big, we probably all had fun with puffballs as children, kicking them and smashing them, and if they're really mature, then when you kick them, they poof out like tens of thousands of spores. Next, we have what we call molds. So we're thinking really like kind of that hairy structure of fungi. It often will invade food, or it'll be like deep in the soil. You're not really going to the grocery store and shopping for mold, right? We would call those more mushrooms or edible fungi or things like that. So you're thinking about these essentially microscopic strands that are part of the fungal body. It's also a part of the fungal body of a mushroom, just kind of organized a bit differently. So what you have are these individual structured cells, singular called hypha, plural hyphae, and those cells will divide by mitosis and keep growing and eventually makes like the puffy part that we might see. So on this bread, you might see this white area is kind of puffy. The green area is hard to see it, but generally you'll see like some of these hairs sticking up from the substrate that they're growing on. Far lower left corner, here we have some little tiny mushrooms we call mycena, very delicate, growing essentially in some rotting wood. Then we also see some mycelium that's growing here, that kind of fuzzy stuff. And then we also will see this kind of a funky greenish color called lichens. And lichens represent a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and either green algae or what we call cyanobacteria, or the pigmented bacteria. So all of these things represent some types of diversity of fungi. There are far more, many kinds out there, but this gives you an idea. A fourth group of fungi that we need to distinguish and concentrate on a little bit are the yeast. So yeast typically are growing as single cells. Budding is what we call their type of essentially cell division or reproduction. And these things are microscopic. They can cause quite a bit of infections and problems in humans, including vaginal yeast infections, thrush, what you might call jock itch or yeast infection of the groin, and so on and so forth. We also use yeast for a variety of domestic products, like making fermented products like alcohol and champagne, wine, those kinds of things. And clearly for bread, to raise bread or for the rising of bread. So here on the left-hand side, we see that yeast can make essentially what looks a lot like bacteria on an agar plate. It makes a colony, has that kind of slimy appearance or mucoid appearance. It's very distinguished from other colonies. And so yeast are different in that way. When we grow mold on agar plates or try to grow macrofungi, like those that we eat, we're not going to get this kind of appearance to the colony morphology. All right, you can pause here if you'd like to, for those of you that are just screaming to know more about yeast. But yeast themselves, you see this eukaryotic cell and you see this little bud coming off of this figure up here, basically making a copy of itself. And so then it goes, it can continue growing. So yeast can not only grow as individual cells, but sometimes they form what we call pseudohypha, and it makes them more difficult to treat in infections because they have like two kinds of morphologies. So I thought this is a pretty neat looking figure, and sometimes you might see that they're actually clumped in appearance, but we don't give them bacterial shape names or bacterial arrangement names because they're yeast. All right, so now that I've given you a little bit of introduction to the kingdom fungi, I want to go ahead and give you a set of characteristics that you know in total define this group. Okay, so they are definitely different. Most people will tell you that. So how are they different? They are non-modal, so there's no swimming like with our protozoa. And they have, of course, eukaryotes, because this whole chapter is about microorganisms that are, in fact, eukaryotes. Fungi do not have chlorophyll. Now, what you should know is chlorophyll is a pigment. That pigment can, in fact, be in some bacteria, and we call them the cyano, or the blue-green bacteria. We also know that our algae have chlorophyll, and we know plants have chlorophyll. But fungi do not have chlorophyll, so that's how they're definitely not part of the plant kingdom. They also do not have what we call xylem or phloem, which are types of vascular tissue that essentially is transporting water and food respectively, or water and sugars respectively in plants. And fungi don't have vascular tissue. Okay. Third, we already talked about their cell walls. Fourth, let's talk about types of nutrition or modes of nutrition. So one mode of nutrition is called heterotrophy. The other one is called autotrophy. So we break it down. Troph means to feed or feeding level. You could, think of it that way. And the first part, hetero, means to consume something different. Auto means to make food yourself. So things that are heterotrophs include ourselves, include fungi, include some protozoa, include some bacteria. Okay, so it just simply means that I don't have chlorophyll and I can't make my own food, right? I have to consume food or energy outside of myself. All right, so the way that fungi are going to do that is not terribly unique because bacteria do this as well. But essentially, they release digestive enzymes outside of their cells, so extracellular digestion. And once the products of digestion have broken down, we essentially absorb that through diffusion. And fungi can invade a variety of substrates, from the keratin on human skin to things like grape juice and bark in your garden, and wood, and dead animals, and twigs, and all kinds of things. So they're very opportunistic in that they're going to take advantage of what's there. Okay, body types. We talked about the yeast. Only yeast have yeast type cells. And then the rest of our fungi are going to have this, these repeating elongated cells, singular hypha, plural hyphae, thread-like cells that are going to divide by meiosis and make long strands that now we can see with our eyes. Hyphae are microscopic. Once it becomes mycelium, we can see that with the unaided eye. All right, so we talked about 5, the ability, I think that's a repeat, I'll have to fix that, but the last thing that says here is the heterotrophy is in relation to what these organisms are digesting, which means they themselves have to have the right digestive enzymes. And lastly, this is a big one, fungi produced by spores. Okay, spores in general are teeny tiny little reproductive structures, if you will. One cell, that's it. There's not these like crazy special layers and so on in general. It's not like a seed, like in our flowering plants. It's just a cell out there living on its own, and it's going to try to grow and divide and turn into that fungus again. Spores can be made asexually, so no real genetic difference between the parent and then this asexual spore. But then in what we call higher fungi, like mushrooms, we know that different mating types of mushrooms, mycelium, recognize one another, grow towards one another. They combine their nuclei. They make that cap of a mushroom, and then in the gills, they are literally going to do the last little bit of sexual reproduction and make what we call sexual spores. So the spores of macrofungi are going to have a lot more diversity than the spores of those fungi that are exclusively or almost exclusively dividing by or growing by asexual spores. Okay, another thing we need to differentiate between is saprobes, okay, or saprophytic. Saprophytic organisms like to eat the remains of dead things. So dead plants, animals. It could even be pieces of dead plants or animals in the soil. It could even be in the water, okay? So I had a lot of experience growing fungi in graduate school. So we would isolate or we would grow water molds on sesame seeds, they're so cool. They're absolutely cool. So yes, in fact, in aquatic environments, we can have aquatic fungi. The next one, parasites. So when we think about a parasite is something that is going to live on a host. It can essentially, lower the overall health of the host, but it's not going to kill the host. So we know that fungi have been really excellent parasites, particularly on people who are more immunocompromised. I mean, we're not all walking around with fungal infections, except for those areas that are easy for the fungi to colonize, like our skin and nails and areas where it's warm and moist. Lastly, think about this. We've heard a lot about bioremediation. So essentially, how do we clean up oil from oil spills, and how do we deal with toxic waste? And what we know is that fungi, as a whole, different groups of fungi essentially digest different kinds of organic substrates. And yes, some of those substrates might be petroleum products or might be toxic waste. Many fungi can live in really, really bad environments. So if it's low nutrients, like low nitrogen, little water, man, they are thriving. And we also know that fungi can live in extreme environments.